If you've ever been in a toxic relationship with a narcissist, you might be feeling a little lost right now. You might feel like you don't even know who you are. So what exactly is it that causes us to lose ourselves and our identity in a toxic relationship with a narcissist? When you've dealt with narcissistic abuse for a long time and you finally get out, you're going to spend a lot of time first grieving and then healing. The recovery process can be long and complicated, but at some point you're going to want to start being your old self again. You know, the self you used to be before you met the narcissist. Yeah, and listen, I absolutely get it. I felt that way too. Who doesn't want to get back to their old selves after going through a whole self-altering toxic relationship? After all, you've been walking around feeling like a ghost or a shell of your former self. The narcissist caused you to put all your own interests on the back burner, or maybe they shamed you out of actually even thinking about the things you once really loved and enjoyed. It makes total sense that you'd want to feel like yourself again, right? Of course. So I've got some good news for you and I've got some bad news for you. Here's the thing. You're never going to be able to become your old self again, but don't stress too much, because with that being said, here's the good news. You can most certainly become an even better and more amazing version of yourself. Even better, when you create your new self with intention, you can almost literally become exactly the person you want to become. You might feel like you're sort of desperately seeking your old self, right? There might be a part of you that feels angry and overwhelmed by the idea that you can't get your old self back. So before I tell you exactly why you can't be exactly who you were before, I just want to remind you of one thing, something really important here. You've got to be first compassionate with yourself, and you've got to realize that you have been through an abusive relationship with a narcissist who literally did everything in their power to tear you apart. Most likely, you didn't realize how profound the damage was until the relationship was over, because often narcissists keep us in a sort of spinning state where we are so busy trying to just get through the days, trying to survive without upsetting or angering them, that we just don't have the time to slow down and recognize the extent of the effects of the trauma. And now, here you are, maybe riddled with depression, anxiety, and if you're anything like most other survivors, well, you might also be suffering from c-ptsd, or complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and or other related issues. You can absolutely heal though, and you can totally take your life to the next level. But your old self is gone, and that might feel really scary. So we're going to talk about exactly why you can't be your old self again after narcissistic abuse. First, is it really true that your old self is actually gone after enduring narcissistic abuse? Can you go back to being the person you used to be before the abuse? At the very least, you can heal and move forward and live a satisfying life for sure. But there are a couple of reasons that you won't be able to become exactly who you used to be before this all happened to you. The first one being that time, it changes everything. I mean, let's just look at the practical side of things here. There's the fact that time has passed since this all started for you. Maybe you've had kids, you've gotten older, you've had experiences. You might have been in this relationship for 20 years, or if it's a parent or a family member, you might have been dealing with it for your whole life. Even without the trauma, you're gonna be a different person today than you were when you first started the relationship. Time changes everything. And this brings me to the next point, trauma. It changes you. The ongoing trauma of narcissistic abuse changes you significantly. Not only does it change who you become, but it changes what might have been a happy, confident, secure person into someone who doubts their worth and their value every single day. It takes away your ability to have a healthy, full life. And it causes you to really hyper-focus on all the things that you think are wrong with you as you try to resolve it repeatedly over and over again. All of this ongoing abuse and trauma, it leads to actual, literal brain damage. That's right, it causes brain damage. And brain damage of any type, it changes you. I'm going to give you just a really quick overview of how that happens, and it starts with the 3 significant parts of your brain, which include the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the cortex. Now, the amygdala is the part of the brain that we call the fear center. Each time you become anxious or scared, that area becomes activated. It also keeps the memories of the abuse in it, and each time anyone talks about it or anything like that, your amygdala is activated. The abuse is what caused the fear center to keep activating, and now it's kind of hypersensitive. And the constant activation of the fear center is going to cause it to, of course, get worse. This, of course, leads to mood disorders and anxiety disorders. Well, then there's the hippocampus, which is the part of the brain that stores those shorter-term memories, which it then converts into long-term memories. The hippocampus dictates exactly how and when you can learn anything new, but uncontrolled stress will shrink it. So, as you could probably imagine, the constant stress you're dealing with in a toxic relationship relationship with a narcissist? Well, it's going to shrink it. It's going to lead you to struggle with learning new things in a way that you didn't before, and you'll get a little forgetful. And finally, there's that cortex of the brain, which is the part that is right behind your eyes. This is the area that is in charge of sort of planning and making decisions and paying attention, memory, etc. Now, the cortex also shrinks the same way the hippocampus does when you are under a tremendous amount of uncontrolled stress. This causes your decision making to sort of poop out. It's a challenge at the very least. Your attention span gets shorter. You're far more likely to deal with depression. You might deal with apathy, meaning you just really don't feel like you can do anything at all. That feeling of just being sort of stuck, you know what I'm talking about? And you can stop caring about yourself in ways that you would never expect. I mean, you might even stop showering or brushing your teeth. Self-care will definitely become a thing of the past, or it might in a situation like this. But now here's the good news. The brain can be retrained, and you don't have to feel stuck in this trauma loop forever. Even better, there are plenty of things that you can do on your own at home to actually sort of start to rewire your brain all by yourself. That is thanks to neuroplasticity, which offers hope for survivors of narcissistic abuse like nothing else. See, this is how our brain can sort of rewire itself by forming new neural connections throughout our whole lives. This means that the neurons or the nerve cells in our brain can compensate for the injury and sort of adjust themselves in response to new situations or to changes in our environment. Even better, we can intentionally control this process if we choose to do so through mindfulness and other things, and I'll include a link to a video with more information about this in the description below. Now, how do we become the best possible version of ourselves after narcissistic abuse? Well, thanks to both time and the effects of the ongoing trauma that we have experienced in a toxic relationship with an abusive narcissist, we technically cannot be exactly the same person we were before we started this whole thing. I mean, if we're being honest, any profound experience will change us. But again, you can heal and move forward, and I'm going to share with you right now exactly how you can start to do that. First, you need to feel your feelings. When you're in a relationship with a narcissist, you learn really quickly how to ignore your own emotions. You learn that your feelings don't matter, at least not as much as the narcissist's feelings in any given situation. And so when you do get out of that relationship, you might keep going in that direction. For me personally, that was one of the worst things I dealt with in narcissistic abuse, was forgetting how to feel my feelings. And honestly, I didn't even want to feel them, right? They sucked. The truth is that one of the most significant mistakes I made on my own, in my own recovery, was that whole shoving my feelings down and trying to move on without feeling them thing. I really did believe at the time that this was the right thing to do. I just learned about the law of attraction and that I could control my feelings, and I also didn't like how it felt to deal with those emotions, and I didn't know exactly how to process them. So it wasn't until several years later, when I noticed I still hadn't managed to fully heal, that I really got my head around this concept. And that's why now when I work with my clients, I make a point of teaching them exactly what to do and how to feel their feelings and how to move forward from there, because you can work on this at home yourself. And you can do that by taking some time to sort of grieve the relationship. Take some time to cry or scream or throw things or break things, whatever you need to do to get through those hard times, those difficult emotions. Like I said, it's no good, it sucks. But it is something that you've got to do if you want to take the next step toward healing. It really is important. Now this brings me to my next point: time soothes trauma. So in addition to allowing your feelings to flow, you've got to give yourself the time you need to heal. Let's face it, there is a chance that you might not be all the way healed because triggers and reminders of the abuse pop up around you all the time. Now, even if you do get to the point of handling it okay, you can still really be affected one way or another, and you might just be shoving it all down. So this is really the time to get to know yourself again. Depending on your circumstances and the specifics of your situation, you might need to find a therapist or a counselor or a coach who specializes in narcissistic abuse recovery to help you find yourself again. It also helps to find a narcissistic abuse recovery support group like SPAN, which you can check out at queenbeing.com/SPAN, SPAN, so that you can find support from others who have been where you are. Most importantly, remember that there is no standard time limit for healing. Each one of us is a little bit different, and we're going to each have different needs. You're going to need to do what feels right for you in this moment and to take as much time as you need to heal. You're important and you matter, don't forget. Now next, firm up your boundaries. During the relationship with a narcissist, you and I both know they repeatedly crossed our boundaries, didn't they? And no matter how firmly we had them set before, we might have almost forgotten how to actually set and stand behind boundaries effectively. When you are healing from narcissistic abuse, we've got an opportunity to learn or relearn how to set firm boundaries and how to ensure that they stick. And honestly, setting boundaries is not only necessary for your healing and your continued well-being, but it is literally one of the best forms of self-care out there. Whether it happened before or during your relationship, you might have become a people pleaser. And while you don't have to be rude or disrespectful to anyone to enforce your boundaries, it might feel a little unnatural to you at first, so be prepared. Now I'm going to include a link to a video in the description below to explain exactly how you can learn to set set and hold your boundaries in place after narcissistic abuse. Which brings me to my next point. You have to forgive yourself for what you didn't know during the relationship. Maya Angelou once said, "Forgive yourself for what you didn't know before you learned it." I love this quote and I use it all the time because it so perfectly expresses one of the most important things about narcissistic abuse recovery. Most survivors are relatively intelligent people who can easily read most other people. That's why we're so likely to blame ourselves and to beat ourselves up for taking the abuse as long as we did. And listen, I get it. I totally get it. It is easy to blame yourself for not realizing what was happening and for accepting the abuse, as long as you did. And if you're anything like me, you might be beating yourself up about it. I did. You might wonder, how did you fall for it? Why did you allow this to happen in the first place? Or why didn't you leave sooner? Some small part of you might even secretly think that you deserved it all along. But listen, my friend, it's not your fault, and that's not true. You did not sign up for this relationship with the full knowledge of what was going to happen. You certainly didn't know that you would be forced to endure narcissistic abuse, and if you did, you would have run the other way. And for the record, by the way, you definitely did not deserve it. Let me just remind you, you didn't deserve it. No one deserves it. So take the time to acknowledge that you have encountered a traumatic and devastating situation, and recognize that regardless of how you feel right now in this moment, at one time, your ability to accurately perceive the situation may have been sort of clouded by your feelings for the abuser. Now, once you're out, your perception will start to get clearer. And while it might take a little time, you will get to the point where you can see the truth. And that's about the time you're going to want to rewrite your story, which is my next point. Years ago, I built a course called Rewrite Your Story for narcissistic abuse survivors. And I did that because so often we sort of misidentify ourselves, or we see ourselves in a sort of skewed way thanks to the lies and gaslighting thrust our way by the narcissistic abusers in our lives. Basically, the way the abuser saw you is how you sort of see yourself, at least on some level. Now, you probably recognize that you've been gaslighted, and you probably recognize now that the abuser did absolutely have every intention of ruining your self-esteem. You probably understand that it was all about control, all about keeping you in your place, so that you could continue to provide the narcissistic supply the narcissist desperately needed, while at the same time not really realizing that you were really too good for the narcissist. The narcissist has known this all along, and that's why they play these mind games. They don't want you to recognize it and leave them. And now you struggle with low self-esteem because you see yourself through the narcissist's eyes. But when you begin to see your worth, you can really start to rewrite your story and realize that what the abuser said about you wasn't true. If you're struggling with this, you can work with a narcissistic abuse recovery coach or therapist, or even do it on your own by taking my Rewrite Your Story course. I'll try to include the link to that in the description below as well. Now remember that knowledge is power. Before you got into an abusive relationship, you might not have known what kinds of warning signs or red flags you should be watching for. You didn't know what to do to keep yourself safe. You didn't know about any of this. Here's the thing. Narcissistic abuse is so subtle and pervasive that you can literally be going through it right now in this moment and not even know it. You won't see it. Or maybe, like probably 90% of narcissistic abuse survivors, you were raised in an abusive, toxic family, or you had some other kind of trauma in childhood, which would lead you to have both a higher threshold for abuse as well as trouble setting boundaries. Your expectations for the relationship might have been a little too low as well as a result of this. And because toxic sort of felt normal to you, you might have tolerated or even overlooked the early signs and just went with it. But now you've recognized what you've had to deal with, and you may have even had a full-on epiphany that led you to this point. Now that you know more about what a toxic relationship looks like and what kinds of behaviors are not acceptable to you, you can be empowered to make better choices in the future. Knowledge truly is power when it comes to healing from and growing forward after narcissistic abuse. The bottom line is that while you may never be exactly the person you were before you met the narcissist, you absolutely can heal, and you absolutely can become the person you want and deserve to be afterward. Are you with me? This brings me to the question of the day. And the question of the day is, what has changed about you since your experience with narcissistic abuse? And what is the best piece of advice that you've learned along the way that has been helpful for you? Share your thoughts, share your ideas, share your experiences in the comment section below, and let's talk about it. Please do share your best pieces of advice about narcissistic abuse recovery, because it might help another survivor or even save a life today. As always, thank you so much for being a part of my day and a part of my life. And hey, thanks for letting me be a part of yours. It really does mean a lot to me. Now, before I go, make sure you take a look at the videos I'm going to leave for you right there and right there. And while you're here, hit the subscribe button right over there so we can stay connected and continue on this healing journey together. I'll see you soon.